In 1987, developer Nihon Falcom released Ancient Ys Vanish, the first game in the Ys series. It was released for the PC-88, a Japanese computer. Over the next several years, console ports were released. Japan got a version on the Nintendo Famicom, and the Sega Master System version was released worldwide under the title Ys Vanished Omens. A year later, Ys 2, Ancient Ys Vanish, the final chapter, was released. This game was the rare case in the Ys series where a game was a direct sequel to a previous title. All other games in the series, while featuring recurring characters, are standalone adventures. In 1989, Ys 1 and 2 were remade with updated graphics and sound for the PC Engine and TurboGrafx-16 CD. It was an early CD title, and in the United States it was the third CD title to be released. It was even packed in with CD units for a time. This is the version that I had a chance to play, and I found it to be an amazing start to a long-running action RPG series that's still going strong today with a 10th numbered title set to be released later in 2023. It's by no means perfect, and I'll discuss the pros and cons of this game. There were many remakes of Part 1 and 2, but this particular version was exclusive to NEC's TurboGrafx and PC Engine hardware. Since it's a CD title, it can be played on either the US TurboGrafx-16 system with the CD attachment, the Turbo Duo, or the Japanese equivalent hardware, since there's no region lock on CD-ROM 2 and Super CD games. This title is also on the TurboGrafx-16 mini console in English, and TurboGrafx emulation is near perfect as well nowadays. The one thing that everyone is going to notice with this game is that it's very short for an RPG. In fact, most, if not all, the Ys games are relatively short adventures. Each game, or book as it's described in this version, will take approximately 8 to 10 hours to complete on your first playthrough. That makes this compilation roughly 16 to 20 hours long. For me, this was a breath of fresh air. I had just finished playing a 60-hour RPG prior to this, so having a short adventure follow up that game was really refreshing. It feels like the game doesn't want to waste your time. There's very little grinding involved in the game. Instead, it focuses on the story and the action. Since this is a CD game, it includes several animated cutscenes with voiceovers. I had played Ys 3, Wanderers from Ys on the TurboGrafx CD several years ago, and that game had absolutely horrible voice acting. So I was surprised to find that 1 and 2 contained some pretty professional acting. Seems like they put a lot of effort into making the cutscenes stand out, being such an early CD title. On top of that, this translation is very well written, and I was never confused with awkward grammar or just incorrect translations in general. Upon starting the game, you take control of the protagonist, Adol Christin, a swordsman traveling the world. You arrive in the town of Minea in the land of Asteria. Just like the original PC-88 version, the history of Asteria and the ancient land of Ys is in the manual. What's missing from the TurboGrafx manual, unfortunately, is the backstory for Adol. It's not game-breaking, but it would have added to the experience of taking on the role of Adol in this game. Upon arrival, Adol is greeted by a fortune teller named Sarah, seeking the help of an adventurer. She describes to you a great evil returning to the land. You're directed to seek out the 6 books of Ys. These contain the history of the land of Ys, an ancient land that mysteriously disappeared 800 years ago. Also in those books contains the knowledge to defeat the evil forces. As you seek out the books, you'll become more entwined in a sinister plot by these evil forces to destroy and conquer the world. You get started with some action really fast. Sarah won't actually reveal to you any of this until you have a sword, armor, and shield. After all, why would she enlist a warrior to save the world who doesn't even have the basic equipment to go out exploring? You'll head to the store and find that you can't quite afford every one of these pieces of equipment, so you'll have to leave town and start fighting some monsters to gain some gold. This gives you a good opportunity to explore the land of Asteria and gain a few levels before you really dive into the game. It's relatively easy and quick to pick up the gold that you need, plus a few levels of experience while getting a feel for the area around the town of Minea. There are tons of people in towns and throughout the world. This makes the world feel more vibrant and alive. Most people have something interesting to say, even if it's not directly related to the plot. They even change up their dialogue after certain events occur. The game is played in an overhead perspective in the towns, fields, and various dungeons. Combat is very simple, but I found it to be really satisfying. Some people might not like that style though. I heard it referred to as bump combat. Basically, you don't tap any buttons to swing your sword. You simply collide with an enemy and an attack will occur. If your attack is successful, there'll be a satisfying hit sound and the enemy will be knocked back. If, on the other hand, the enemy gets a hit on you, there's a very jarring hit sound, indicating that you've taken damage. Attacking an enemy dead center on their sprite is almost a guaranteed way to take a hit in return. Instead, it's almost always pretty safe to hit the enemy at a slight offset, or from behind or to the side. When you get to Ease 2, the game adds magic attacks in addition to the bump combat. These can be triggered by selecting the spell that you want and pressing the 1 button to cast it. The attack magics are all ranged, and especially late in the game, I was mostly using my magic instead of attacking enemies head-on. If you do take damage from an enemy, there are several ways to heal. One way is to use herbs that you can buy in towns or find in treasure chests. The other way is to stand still and allow your HP to recover. This only works on the overworld or in towns, it won't work inside dungeons. Even if you do this on the overworld, you need to be careful that an enemy doesn't approach you while you're standing there recovering. Your life fills pretty quickly with this method, but it's still a risky task, adding some challenge to the game. There are different magic items, equipment, and enhancements between Part 1 and 2. When you transition between the end of Part 1 and the start of Part 2, which starts automatically in this version, there's no option to start at Book 2, you'll keep some of your weapons, but lose most of your equipment. That's okay, since you'll find even better equipment very shortly into the second part of the adventure. I'll give credit to the manual for keeping the Ease 1 and 2 equipment, items, and enhancements separate, so you're not at the end of Part 1 thinking that you missed a ton of helpful items. I've found the magic in Book 2 to be much more useful and interesting than the rings from Part 1. The rings have various effects like increasing your strength, defense, or slowing down enemy movement. These are all in Part 1 exclusively. The magic in Part 2 includes a fireball, a light spell that reveals secret passages, a teleport spell to return to any town or landmark you visited, a time spell that temporarily stops all enemies, a force field, and a spell that changes your appearance into that of a demon. That spell is required to enter certain areas of the world. I liked how this story in the game progresses. Part 1 is about discovering what happened to the ancient land of Ease as you collect the 6 books. Then, in Part 2, which takes place in the land of Ease itself, has you returning the books to the sages so that they can grant you the power that you need to destroy the evil forces. The graphics are a mixed bag in this title. The cutscenes are fantastic with good animation for the time. Like most early CD titles, the animation is not full screen due to the limited RAM of the CD-ROM 2 titles. The in-game graphics, while taking advantage of the robust color palette of the system, is quite unimpressive though. This is because the game is windowed into a much smaller area of the screen. I think it's to preserve the look and feel of the original PC-88 title, since other games like Newtopia on the system play just fine with a full-screen playfield. The life bar and stats area seems like a waste and could have been much more compact, giving more room for the game itself. The sprites and backgrounds are more detailed than the original, but are fairly small due to the window boxing of the game. Even bosses are fairly unimpressive compared to the screen-sized bosses of many other games on the system. The scrolling is also pretty choppy, but nowhere near as bad as games like Ease 3. This is due to the number of pixels that the background scrolls at a time and the speed at which your character moves. Again, this is probably due to making this port function the same as the PC-88 version and not a hardware limitation. The only area that looked really bad in terms of scrolling was in certain floors of a tower where they tried to simulate parallax scrolling. This just doesn't work given the way the single background layer scrolls, and even made me feel a little disoriented in those parts. The music, on the other hand, is fantastic, and one of the best soundtracks on the system. The original music was composed primarily by Yuzo Koshiro, who would go on to write some amazing soundtracks like Revenge of Shinobi, the Streets of Rage series, and some of the Etrian Odyssey games. This version is recomposed by Ryo Yonemitsu, and he does a fantastic job of bringing Koshiro's original score to the TurboGrafx. This is my favorite version of these songs, even more so than the modern remixes. They just don't stand up to this version. That mix of chiptune, electric guitars, and digital synthesizers was unique to this era of TurboGrafx and Sega CD titles, and I'm sad that it didn't live on past those consoles. Just to give you a feel for the music, here are a few samples for your enjoyment. Each game combined into this title has its own unique aspects. Part 1 features many quests that you need to complete for various people in the towns of Asteria. Almost all of these were required to progress, but you could tackle them in any order you really wanted. Part 2 was a lot more linear. Every event needed to be completed in order to progress to the next one. On the other hand, the world of Ys 2 is much larger than Ys 1 and had far more diverse landscapes and dungeons. The first game mostly takes place in the same couple of locations, with Darm Tower taking up a large portion of the game. Ys 2 had more varied areas, including ruins, caves, snowy mountains, sewers, and a vast temple taken over by the enemy. Part 2, on the other hand, had much more puzzle-oriented dungeons, requiring you to activate switches to raise or lower water in the sewers in order to open new paths, or finding ways to get guards in the temple to leave their posts for you to continue. I found these parts to be much less intuitive than the more straightforward exploration of Part 1. I feel like dungeon design in the first part was more to my liking, but Part 2 definitely felt more fun with the inclusion of magic and other abilities. The boss fights are all pattern recognition. Figure out the boss pattern, dodge his attacks, then use that short time in between his attacks to move in for the kill. I do like that in Part 2 you just can't spam the fireball magic to kill bosses. They're pretty much immune to magic, so you have to discover the correct pattern to dodge and attack each boss. Some boss fights took a dozen attempts until I learned the patterns well enough to survive and win. The only flaw to boss fights is that you're not allowed to access your item menu during the fight. That means whatever equipment you have equipped is what you'll use, and the item you selected is the only one available to you. So you need to make sure you're ready for the fight and have the proper item equipped and ready to go. The nice thing is that if you do die on the boss, the game makes a checkpoint right outside the boss room, so you can keep trying until you're successful. You also have the option of saving the game anywhere except in the middle of a boss fight, and there are multiple save slots available. This makes the game much more manageable since you don't have to backtrack to find a save point. Overall, this is a great version to play. I really appreciated the short playtime, and this is perfect for people who want to experience an RPG with a good story, but don't want to invest 60 to 100 hours, which seems to be the norm for most modern RPGs now. I also played the Sega Master System version of Part 1, and it doesn't compare in quality to the TurboGrafx version. I can set aside the graphical and sound differences of weaker hardware, but the TurboGrafx game plays so much more smoothly. TurboGrafx 1 also doesn't have the low level cap, and you gain levels much faster in this one. This one does have a level cap of 55, but you won't even get close to that until very late in Part 2. I'd recommend this game to any fan of action RPGs. The story is interesting, the action is fun, and never frustrating to the point of wanting to quit. And there isn't any time where you'll need to excessively grind experience or gold to progress. Even in parts where you want to grind, you can actually increase the speed of the game in the options menu, cutting the grind time in half. Just watch out with this option. You move twice as fast, but so do the enemies. There are 11 games in this series, including Ys Origins and 2 distinctly different versions of Ys 4. A few older titles like 3 and 4 have been remade using the more modern engine as well. Now that I've played through the first 3 games in the series, I'm excited about the rest in the series. I'm curious though what your experiences have been with Ys, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments section. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then.